Welcome to week number 10. So this week, again, we are discussing Chapter 8, which is going to be, again, talking about microbiology. This week will be a little different because we are going to discuss how bacteria will grow along with other microorganisms and how they grow. So I want to touch back on what we discussed in week number 9. So we discussed how microbiology is the study of microorganisms. And microorganisms are those tiny entities capable of carrying on a living process. Some examples of microorganisms are bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. Now, if you remember from the last week's video, we discussed how microorganisms are classified, and that is by their shape and their growth pattern. Remember that their shape could be round, rod, or spiral, so coccus, bacillus, and spirillum. So last week we did a lot of the discussions on microorganisms, but what we did not discuss is how we collect those samples, how we transport those samples, and how we process those samples. So when you're collecting a sample for microbiology, there are a few precautions that you need to follow. First and foremost, you want to make sure that you are wearing the appropriate PPE, or personal protective equipment. This could be things such as your gloves, if need be your gowns, face masks, shields, goggles. All of those might be important, but gloves are definitely number one. You want to disinfect the specimen cup after collection and after the specimen has been processed. You want to use a transport bag or a biohazardous bag after you collect the specimen to get it to the lab where it needs to go. And the final step is, of course, making sure that you wash your hands after collection is completed. Now, the ideal time that is best to collect your sample is before any antibiotics have been given. The reason is because after you give an antibiotic, that the job of the antibiotic is to actually kill the microbes that are causing the virus or the bacteria or the fungi. If that happens, we have nothing to collect for our sample. So we always want to get those microbes collected before any antibiotics are given. So after you collect the sample, you will need to go through the process to identify the infectious microorganism. This process will take place under a microscope. Anytime you think of a microbiology specimen, always think that it will happen under a microscope. And there are 3 methods that we use to identify those microorganisms. The first one is called a gram stain method. This is the process of staining microorganisms that serve as a primary means to identify them and classify them. It's helpful for you as a medical assistant to be able to distinguish the difference between what the grams mean. A gram-positive microorganism will appear purple in color under the microscope, where a gram-stain negative microorganism will appear pink or red in color. The second method is called smears. This is where you will actually place your specimen onto a glass slide and smear it across the slide and then stain it if necessary to determine if it's positive or negative. The final method is called a wet mount method. This process, we do so to make sure that we can see the organism in its living state. So you'll actually see it kind of moving around. This is generally done to detect the presence or the absence of a clue cell. Now, these three methods that I just discussed are all methods that would be used in a physician's office laboratory, or a POL. But there may be times that you will need to send out a sample to a larger facility, such as a reference lab. When we do this, it's done in order to identify the microorganism and see how it grows. Now, in order for microorganisms to grow, they need a few ingredients to help them. First, they will need oxygen and carbon dioxide. They will also need some specific nutrients, such as meat extract, peptone, mineral salts, or calcium or sodium. Any of those will help the microorganisms grow as well. So now that you know how they grow, you will need to know what they grow on. So last week in the video, you heard me talking a lot and saying pretty repetitively things such as a culture media. Now, culture media can be solid, semi-solid, or liquid. Most frequently, you are going to be using a solid culture media, and that is generally found in a petri dish. But the actual substance itself is called an agar plate. Now, agar plates are really just a gelatin substance that is obtained from seaweed. When it first arrives to be used as an agar plate, it comes as a liquid first, and then we will heat it up to make that gelatin substance. So like I said, most commonly you're going to use petri dishes to grow your microorganisms, so it's really important that you understand how to inoculate them. Inoculating them means that you will need to know how to transfer your microorganisms from the sample to the culture media in which they will grow on. There are two methods to inoculate a petri dish or agar plate. First one is called the isolation method. So what that means is that you will create 4 different areas on a plate to create colonies. When you do this, you will actually leave the middle open. So for example, let's say that you have a circle agar plate. You will start at the top and you will create 1 colony here, and then you will rotate, create 1 colony here, rotate again, create 1 colony on the side, and then the bottom. So you should have top, bottom, right, and left. You want to leave the middle open, but if any microorganisms or growth happens in there, that means one of the colonies took off very well. The second method is called a colony count method. And in this method, you inoculate the entire culture media, and then you count how many colonies you have. Alright, so that's the brief overview that I have for you this week. Please make sure that you refresh yourself on Chapter 8. You should have already read it, but it's always good to go back and touch base with some of these chapters. You do have 1 discussion post this week, and that is on bacteria shapes. Please make sure that you make your initial discussion post Tuesday by midnight, and your 2 responses to classmates are due Saturday by midnight. Now, it is week number 10, and we are so close to the end, which is, I'm sure some of you just can't wait. We will be having our final exam as a written final exam in the classroom in week 11. So that means that this week in the lab we will be having a final exam review. Please make sure that you come prepared for that and you have all of the necessary items that you will need to participate in that review. That will be the last thing that we do this week in the lab, so please make sure that you hang around and you stick it out to the end so that way you can get a good review in. Alright guys, that is all I have for you. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you in week 10 on Thursday. Bye guys.